In the shadow of Silver Pines, one man's untouchable 10-acre haven becomes the battleground for an HOA tyrant's absurd quest for control, armed only with a beer, a drone, and a deed that laughs at her rules. The moment the SUV skidded into my gravel driveway like it was pursuing a criminal, I knew tranquility and silence had formally ended. Out stepped a woman in a cherry-red windbreaker stitched with 3 bold letters. HOA. She appeared like someone who pressed her clipboard prior to morning meals. Accompanied by 2 assistants bearing flyers and measuring tape, she advanced up my porch steps as if she controlled the estate. I had just settled with a chilled beer and a new paperback when she obstructed the sunset and declared in a twangy tone that I faced summons for 7 infractions. I hadn't even unpacked my fishing poles yet. Her name was Karen Grigsby, the self-appointed leader of the local HOA. Though the word local was generous, my home rested on 10 acres of tree-enveloped liberty along a private lake's rim, 20 minutes from the closest coffee spot, and 40 from anyone who might fuss over hues or postbox elevation. She rejected the beer I extended, nor the obvious truth that I belonged to none of her absurd resident group. I had purchased this plot because it ranked among the final unclaimed HOA-free territories in the whole county. And I verified that detail in county archives, official papers, and even with a former surveyor. But Karen didn't arrive to converse. She arrived to dominate. She extracted a chart, unfurled it as if unveiling a fresh landmass, and began indicating crimson lines in tinted areas. Per her account, my parcel lay squarely inside Silver Pines' HOA domain. She labeled it a slight blunder, a formality swiftly fixed if I merely endorsed this form recognizing the HOA's power and consenting to retroactive fees for the prior 6 months. I inquired if she'd prefer me to draft a joining contract for her to enter my imaginary moose lodge in exchange. She failed to chuckle. Her assistants seemed eager to evaporate. I informed her courteously yet resolutely that my estate wasn't governed by any HOA. Had never been and never would be. That's when she offered the grin. Not a warm one. The sort of grin folks display right before activating a trigger. She bent forward and murmured, "I suspect you'll discover the county views it otherwise. You'll hear from us shortly." Then she pivoted and strode back to her SUV, flicking her fingers for her minions to trail. I observed her taillights fade among the trees, drew a deep pull from my beer, then entered and accessed the aged iron vault concealed behind my fireplace. From it, I retrieved a sturdy manila folder bearing a pristine notarized land title. But what counted beyond the title was the appended sheet, an authentic writer from 1987, endorsed by the initial proprietor, the county evaluator, and a magistrate. It was scrawled, strangely official, and utterly explicit. The estate was forever barred from all future incorporations by emerging groups owing to a terrain donation linked to a preservation covenant. In essence, I was impervious, and I grasped a secret Karen overlooked. The very lane she had traversed to intimidate me crossed a minor, overlooked segment of terrain that belonged to me as well. The following dawn, I got my initial HOA summons. It arrived personally via a youth who appeared ashamed to be present. Summons 1, unpermitted postbox. Summons 2, unendorsed outer coating shade. Summons 3, employment of non-conforming barrier supplies. There were 7 altogether, each more ludicrous than the previous. By their roster, I had breached regulations that didn't apply to my terrain. I abandoned the packet on my porch like spoiled bait and continued my brew. That midday, a fresh missive appeared. This one composed and sealed with the HOA's preposterous silver pine cone emblem. It constituted an offer to join the communal greeting meal. Required, naturally. I nearly guffawed. It was set for Sunday at the HOA leader's residence. The handout even noted participation would count as willing adherence. I refused by skipping it and instead paddled my kayak to the lake's distant shore. Upon my way back, I glimpsed a white van stationed off the path amid a line of foliage. No labels, merely idling. I observed it briefly. No stir. I extracted my phone, magnified via the lens, and detected a lengthy telephoto lens protruding slightly from the parted pane. Someone was photographing my grounds that evening. I fetched my veteran military drone, cleared its dust, and dispatched it aloft. I once piloted scouting operations professionally. A local meddler posed no rival. The drone stream verified it. The van was filming. Two men of middle years within, scanning documents, capturing images. The subsequent dawn, the HOA's digital bulletin board erupted with an entry regarding non-adherent yard fixtures and unlawful barriers along the path. That's when I realized Karen wasn't merely bluffing. She was assembling a dossier, or at least striving to feign one. The issue was she failed to perceive she'd entered a juridical snare. The title wasn't merely robust, it was impenetrable. My estate wasn't simply beyond their grasp. It was engineered thus, fortified with lawful plating long before HOAs emerged. But Karen persisted. She reappeared 2 days on with a fellow in a reflective vest hauling what resembled a surveyor's stand. He presented as a perimeter re-evaluation advisor engaged by the HOA to settle zoning irregularities. I requested his qualifications. He stumbled. I sought his state permit code. He feigned deafness. I stated the sole assessment he'd conduct today involved his pace returning to his vehicle before I summoned the sheriff. Karen charged me with antagonism and recalled that communal norms demanded collaboration. I recalled her that her notepad lacked lawful sway here. She raged away once more. I resumed my porch, reopened the manila folder anew, and examined that scrawled provision more intently. It concerned not only exemption from HOAs. It referenced another element, too. Terrain oversight privileges over neighboring entry routes, encompassing the ingress lane. I grinned and served myself another brew. The contest was merely commencing. 3 days following Karen's roadside summons raid and the evaluator ploy that concluded with a stern, "Depart my grounds," I roused to an oddity. On my entry veranda, positioned tidily beside the entry rug like a Bizarre Dreams care package, lay a pottery dish brimming with blueberry cakes, a petite glass vessel of presumed artisanal preserve, and a crisply creased note. The note stated with sincerest HOA cordiality, "We trust you'll rethink a love, Karen." The cakes seemed oddly flawless, and considering the week's occurrences, I declined to sample them for taste or toxin. I discarded the entire array into the waste bin and proceeded indoors to brew Java. That was when I observed the faint pulsing glow on my activity detector display. An item had activated it in the wee hours. I reviewed the recording and indeed, there stood Karen in person clad in an apparent leisure combat ensemble creeping up my stairs bearing the cake dish. She even halted to align my entry rug prior to withdrawing down the lane with the grace of one persuaded their publicity ploy had secured them canonization. That evening, I encountered the subsequent astonishment. During a border patrol via my drone lens stream, I noted that identical white van had returned. This occasion stationed deeper along the route, precisely beyond my estate's edge. I deployed the drone afresh, this instance tracing a broad loop above the canopy to evade spotting and focused on the cabin. There were presently 3 occupants. One hammered keys on a portable computer. Another displayed what resembled a schematic of my estate across the console, and the third directed a lens straight at my dwelling. HOA spying phase 2. I itched to steer the drone into their glass, but rather I suspended it several hundred feet high and employed the magnification to record their vehicle tag. A swift query via a communal database affirmed the van belonged to an entity named Neighborhood Integrity Solutions, which upon deeper probe proved a facade firm connected to none other than the Silver Pines HOA. Karen was now directing complete monitoring efforts. I began pondering if her forthcoming tactic entailed her own aerial units or maybe orbital scouting. I duplicated the recording, dated it, and archived it in the expanding dossier tagged HOA Absurdity Juridical Arsenal. That dossier was swelling hourly. By the weekend, matters intensified to a fresh tier of folly. Sunday morn, prior to dawn, I was aroused by the echo of a magnified tone. Initially, I deemed it a patrol megaphone or some crisis alert, but as I tugged on my trousers and emerged onto the veranda, I discerned it was an audio apparatus affixed to a mobile pedestal at the trail's verge abutting my estate. There amid the misty glow loomed Karen, supported by a modest throng of devoted HOA affiliates. Some clutching placards proclaiming items like community priority and safeguard our norms. Karen wielded a handset and was presenting what resembled an offhand seminar on the value of structure, mutual principles, and the perils of defiant estate holders who spurned integration. I lingered blinking, mug in grip, pondering if I slumbered yet. Then I espied the collapsible surfaces aft of her. They were erecting repast, garden seats, a bubbly beverage station, trays of rolls. HOA affiliates were approaching as if bound for a Sabbath nuptial. She had transformed the Covenant Trail, lawfully communal, yet flanking my terrain, into a promotional feast. I strolled down the stone lane, serene as ever, until I halted roughly 10 feet from her modest dais. She noticed me and plunged into a novel segment of her address on amicable teamwork and lawful duties. I elevated my palm. She endeavored to override me, but her handset commenced screeching from echo. I tarried. When she halted, I beamed and stated, "Did you secure a license for this communal gathering?" She wavered momentarily. I appended, "Because the county trail is one matter, but the initial 20 feet of that stone, that's personal." "You're all intruding." A hush enveloped the assembly. Karen's lips compressed. A few repast attendees glanced mutually uneasily and one initiated bundling rolls. She strove to reclaim command by asserting communal custom, which is HOA lingo for invented privileges. But I elevated a coded replica of my estate diagram with the primal title layers. All could view the accented zone in scarlet, precisely their stance. Karen appeared primed to shriek. Rather, she muttered something into her handset and extracted the cord from the audio unit. The throng scattered swiftly thereafter, grumbling of crossed wires and misconceptions. I scarcely needed to elevate my tone. 2 days on, I obtained a packet not via post, but affixed to my postbox with crimson adhesive strip. Within lay an pressing alert of breach. Per this gem, I violated novel urgent communal visual standards enacted amid a unique HOA assembly. My offenses now encompassed unsuitable veranda illumination, barrier pattern variance, and omission to log outer sheds. I possessed no sheds. The highlight was the penalty sum, $1,200 payable in 30 days. I chortled so fiercely I required seating. She ceased even feigning legality. This was conflict. But I wasn't merely some isolated hermit. I had devoted years collaborating with armed forces juridical squads. Had negotiated with overseas regimes, confidential pacts, and estate quarrels in nations where statutes were scribbled in scribbles. Karen was submerged far beyond her depth. I composed at my desk that night and fashioned a dispatch. It wasn't furious. It was precise. It highlighted every lawful intrusion, every invented decree, every county breach her HOA had enacted by assailing my spared terrain. I attached images, diagrams, and a structured grievance readied for the county planning panel. Then I withheld dispatch. Not immediately. I harbored a superior scheme. I phoned an aged ally, pension magistrate, presently a freelance advisor, who had labored on the primal terrain waivers linked to my estate. He snickered upon my recount and queried if I retained the primal title. I affirmed. He instructed, "Deliver it. We possess alternatives." The ensuing dawn, I motored to the settlement, entered the County Archive Bureau, and solicited entry to the primal subdivision logs. An attendant aided me in extracting microfiche replicas from 1985 when the Lakeside estate was segmented into allotments. Indeed, allotment 37B, my slice, was distinctly labeled spared from any subsequent incorporation, group oversight, or perimeter recategorization. I had it duplicated, authenticated by a certifier, and lodged an auxiliary replica to my personal title. I also observed another item, something Karen assuredly ignored. The entry route from the primary thoroughfare into the enclave, the one all employed, sliced straight through a 6-foot broad band of terrain encompassed in my acquisition. A narrow strip, scarcely evident, but lawfully mine, and absent it, the HOA lacked immediate entry to their lakeside path. My terrain was the bolt on their entry portal. Karen had erected her dominance on diagrams and suppositions. I held the primal fastener and I prepared to deploy it. It commenced early that dawn, just pre-sunup, with the subdued growl of wheels grating stone and the empty clank of an item metallic being offloaded near my estate's brink. I was already alert, nursing brew on the veranda, the sort of serenity solely a fellow perched on 10 acres of juridical bastion could fully savor. But the noise mismatched any routine avian trill or woodland cadence I'd acclimated to. I placed the cup aside and descended the veranda just as a white utility truck withdrew, abandoning 2 amber markers, a coil of synthetic barrier, and a chap in a vivid vest tampering with a notepad. He was jabbing the soil with an iron bar, and gauging the span betwixt my postbox and the service stanchion like he readied for a celestial touchdown. I hailed, "May I assist?" sans seeming aggressive. He glanced upward, jolted, and then his visage slipped into the variety of courteous firm leer you spot solely on individuals who grasp they're enacting something dubious, but aspire you're too weary to mind. He presented as Carl, stated he was there to conclude a perimeter tweak launched by the Regional Residents Collective. I requested credentials. He proffered a coded badge from some vague evaluation firm I'd never encountered. The emblem resembled it had been crafted on a gratis site. I queried who retained him. He faltered and ultimately muttered of communal repositioning drives. I conveyed courteously that if his souls advanced one further stride beyond that postbox, I'd dial the sheriff. Not as idle talk, but since I had the sheriff's digits preserved from the prior occasion an HOA figure essayed a kin ploy. Carl's beam faded. He gathered his notepad and markers wordlessly and motored off, but not prior to I captured an image of his vehicle tag. 15 minutes hence, Karen's periodical HOA dispatch landed in my electronic post, despite my never enrolling. This edition bore the title Reclaiming Our Perimeters, Advancement via Teamwork. It enumerated nebulous revisions on continuing re-evaluation probes, asserted that various estates were being re-evaluated for enlistment suitability, and concluded with a pressing annotation urging all affiliates to remain cohesive and watchful against external rebellion. External rebellion. I almost strangled on my bread. Karen had formally transitioned from lawful delusion to fortified HOA fabrication. I devoted the morning's remainder to sorting my records. Every image of the monitoring van, every summons dispatch, every segment from the drone stream, and every replicated leaf was now in a virtual repository and a bound volume. I also sketched a chronology of events plainly labeled and interconnected with county statutes. I wasn't readying for dialogue. I was forging a juridical warhead. That midday, I placed several rings to the county planning panel and my doubts were affirmed. No fresh probes had been sanctioned. No incorporations awaited and no entity dubbed Neighborhood Integrity Solutions held any lawful status in the county. The lady I conferred with even snickered upon my citing the outfit. "They sound like a sect," she remarked. I concurred. Yet, I knew Karen didn't function isolated. She had support, or at minimum vocal backers, and those folks weren't solely imbibing bubbly on Sabbaths. They were commencing to credit her fabrication. That grew evident when I obtained a voice dispatch from one of my adjacent dwellers, a chap named Ron, who resided 2 allotments distant. He'd ever been courteous but aloof, one of those types who salutes from 30 feet off and then promptly reverts to clipping. His dispatch was cautious, nearly scripted. He stated he esteemed my autonomy, but that certain in the enclave fretted that my non-adherence might imperil the locale's repute. He proposed I confer with Karen casually to ease matters ere they formalize. I replayed that final segment doubly ere they formalize. It wasn't menace. It was prophecy. Karen had persuaded folks that her fanciful norms were executable, that she shielded them from me, some errant terrain lord who would solo submerge their estate worths into the depths. But what they ignored, what she plainly hadn't deigned to investigate, was that my estate didn't merely adjoin their entry path and enclave shortcut. It was constructed atop the primal lakeside covenant bestowed pre the HOA's genesis. And upon my purchase, I gained a narrow band that threaded like filament amid their tidily sketched perimeter strokes. It was interred in the documents, overlooked by deed handlers, and misconstrued by all save me and the county evaluator who had noted it in the 80s. My forthcoming maneuver wasn't a dispatch. It was superior. I patrolled my estate's edge with 4 novel iron perimeter markers, each capped with a bespoke incised panel that declared, "Personal Estate." Ingress barred sans scripted approval. I situated them precisely at the covenant routes angles, just sufficiently near for HOA affiliates to glimpse every instance they strayed too distant from their assigned trails. I also refreshed the placards on my entry barrier, swapping the aged timber, no intrusion marker for a more formal coded alert that incorporated the pertinent county planning statute and a nod to the primal terrain application waiver. Juridical phrasing has a manner of prompting folks to narrow eyes and reconsider. I desired that. 2 days hence, the placard functioned. Karen re-emerged, this instance not with a notepad, but with a sheriff's aide in attendance. I viewed them arrive and halt along the communal route just beyond the band of my terrain. I encountered them midway. Karen appeared triumphant, as if she had at last invoked genuine sway to address my rebellion. The aide was youthful, likely mere years post-training, courteous but perplexed. He stated there had arisen a grievance over hostile placards and deliberate daunt. I tendered him my coded perimeter records, indicated the county statutes, and proffered him a replica of the planning diagram. He accepted it, perused silently, and then faced Karen and stated, "Madam, he's firmly in his entitlements." Her countenance plummeted so abruptly I deemed she might swoon. She essayed to dispute, asserting there existed refreshed diagrams from the HOA's juridical advisory. The aide arched brows and queried if those diagrams had been lodged with the county. She evaded. He expressed gratitude, clasped my palm, and they departed. Karen averted her gaze as she retreated to her SUV. That dusk, I espied the white van anew. This instance, it stationed before Ron's dwelling. I deployed the drone as the orb dipped, its outline rimmed by amber glow. The stream depicted Karen and 2 others tendering Ron a bundle of records, indicating a diagram, and motioning toward my estate. It required no prodigy to deduce their scheme. She wasn't yielding. She was broadening the ring, striving to muster sufficient inner force to propel some collective ballot. I required swifter motion. That dusk, I rang my ally afresh, the pensioned magistrate, and informed him it was moment. I transmitted the complete volume, every replica record, every image, every audio. He uttered one item pre-disconnecting. Let's position her before the reflector and permit her to observe her own disintegration. The snare was nearly primed, and Karen was oblivious she advanced directly into it. It was the abrupt snap of timber and the rasping bellow of ponderous apparatus that yanked me from slumber at 6:12 a.m. My pains quivered from the bass hum of a motor excessively vast for routine groundskeeping. And by the instant I seized my footwear and hastened outdoors, I confronted the undeniable vision of a least compact loader ripping via the northeast angle of my estate. More pointedly, it was raising my barrier. The primal cedar stake barrier that had endured since my acquisition, meticulously revived by me with implements and labor, now being demolished to fragments and powder by a contraption piloted by a man in a saffron vest, who seemed clueless whose terrain he occupied. I bellowed, "Halt the contraption." He dismounted leisurely, dabbing his forehead and appearing baffled until I insisted on who retained him. He stuttered of an HOA labor directive. Stated he was merely directed to excise non-adherent barriers flanking the communal path and substitute with consistent cleft beam variants sanctioned by the collective. I conveyed this was an HOA terrain, that he had freshly demolished 30 feet of personal barrier on spared grounds, and that he had 5 ticks to depart ere I rang the sheriff. He refrained from contest. He fled hastily, abandoning sundry packs of pre-assembled lumber beams and an exposed implement chest near my mangled entry. I captured images of all, every tread mark, every fractured slat, every fastener and brad strewn in the earth. Then I inspected the novel placard on the barrier stake just beyond the ruin. A crisp slate board with prominent script had been secured to the interim markers someone had evidently pounded overnight. Awaiting HOA reposition zone, prospective communal barrier placement. Do not displace. It was endorsed at base. HOA framework panel sanctioned by K. Grigsby. I lingered there extended, permitting the lunacy to permeate. Karen had formally surpassed the threshold from irritation to defacer. She didn't merely crave sway. She craved to bodily reforge my terrain to align her illusory diagram. I entered, reopened the volume afresh, and commenced scripting. That midday, I conveyed the volume and a memory stick holding every image and drone stream to my advocate's bureau. I recounted the occurrence, displayed the recent ruin stream, and viewed as his expert poise altered to something chillier and keener. We readied a halt directive, a claim for compensation, and an official grievance to the Sheriff's Bureau for estate harm and intrusion. We also readied another item, a restraint. My advocate stated we'd delay until the session to unleash it, but once it struck, it would impact fiercely. Meanwhile, I compensated a regional builder to reconstruct the barrier. Not with identical cedar, however. This instance I scaled up, pressurized oak stakes doubly lofty, alloy fortified angles. And squarely amid the reconstruction, I directed them to embed 2 path lenses concealed in aviary domicils directed at the ingress spot. If Karen desired return, she'd be captured in vivid detail. The ensuing week delivered quietude. No van, no laborers, no abrupt repasts or cakes on my veranda. For a fleeting instant, I speculated if she had at last surrendered. But then arrived the packet. A stout ivory packet slid into my postbox, personally conveyed, sealed with a gilded stamped HOA emblem that resembled it had been styled for elite retreat. Within lay a script titled Alert of Purpose to Encumber. It indicted me of amassing over $3,700 in unremitted HOA levies, penalties, and managerial sanctions for non-adherence, path blockage, and unpermitted placards. The script asserted that if unremitted within 14 days, the HOA would commence actions to affix an encumbrance on my estate. I perused it doubly, then chortled so vigorously I nearly cast it into the blaze hollow. There were 2 chief flaws with Karen's gem. Initially, my estate wasn't lawfully of the HOA. And secondarily, HOAs in this county could not affix encumbrances on estates not bound by contract to their collective statutes. She wasn't merely scheming foul now. She was deranged or frantic, likely both. That identical dusk, I obtained a dispatch via my estate site, a modest leaf I'd erected upon acquiring the terrain for potential leisure lodgings. The dispatch originated from a regional property broker inquiring if I knew the HOA had lately disseminated leaflets asserting my hut was component of a mutual zoning stratum and liable to imminent code application. The broker sought to affirm displaying one of the adjacent abodes to a potential purchaser. I requested a replica of the leaflet. He dispatched it. It was one of Karen's novel alarm ploys. A hue-imprinted single leaf with a hazy outline depicting my hut enclosed in scarlet dashed strokes labeled Prospective HOA Merged Zone. At base in minuscule script lay the true clincher. Awaiting communal ballot, liable to sanction and merger of encircling allotments. She had fabricated a fanciful zoning blueprint and was disseminating it like in sanctioned script to frighten purchasers into adherence. It was defamation via diagram. I forwarded the leaflet to my advocate and rang my magistrate ally. It was moment. The session was timetabled for the subsequent Tuesday. It was formally a minor civic examination. Not theatrical, merely a routine pause to lodge and scrutinize records on HOA intrusion and estate entitlements application. But I ensured it would exceed that. I entered the county tribunal with my advocate, my memory stick, and my title dossier in grasp. Karen was present, attired in a soft azure coat, positioned by a surface with 2 other HOA panel affiliates and a chap who presented as their juridical advisor. The chamber was compact, perhaps 20 chairs, but everyone occupied. Dwellers, HOA devotees, a pair of settlement scribes who likely came since they'd caught wind of something succulent afoot. Karen appeared conceited. I beamed. When the magistrate entered, he promptly sought a synopsis. Karen's advisor plunged into an address on enclave soundness, lawful ambiguities, perimeter mix-up, and the necessity for all inhabitants to form the identical unified frame. He employed phrases like visual harmony and oversight unity. The magistrate hearkened, jotted, then inclined toward me. My advocate rose, tendered the registrar our proof bundle, and initiated with one phrase. Your Honor, my patron's terrain is lawfully shielded from HOA sway owing to a title waiver lodged pre the collective's genesis. And we possess records demonstrating the HOA has deliberately intruded, defaced, and essayed deceitful encumbrance menaces against spared estate. Then we screened the drone stream. Then we displayed the falsified diagram. Then we displayed the monitoring van. The magistrate's visage shifted from intrigued to entertained to a form of incredulity. When I tendered him the primal title with the 1987 scrawled provision endorsed by a county evaluator and magistrate from that epoch, he reclined in his seat, emitted a prolonged breath, and snickered. Not a jeer of derision, but the sort of snicker folks permit when they perceive they've been hauled into a farce with juridical fangs. He regarded Karen and stated, Madam, I'm uncertain if you're misdirected or if you deem you can author your own statutes, but this estate is past your grasp, your statutes, and your sway.
By the instant I exited that tribunal, the atmosphere seemed buoyant.
Not solely from the magistrate's snicker or the decisiveness in his tone when he rejected every of Karen's grievances, but from the dazed quiet that trailed us into the corridor. There were no ensuing barbs, no menaces hissed beneath breath, not even a frantic bid to preserve visage.
Karen didn't pursue us this instance, no notepad in grasp, no retinue striving to vindicate their attendance.
She departed via a flank portal with her advisor and never glanced rearward. I refrained from crowing.
I required not. The verity had resounded louder than any HOA decree ever could.
And more vitally, it had resounded in a lawfully obligatory timbre.
But the true triumph wasn't the tribunal verdict. It was the alarm that ensued. By the subsequent dawn, my electronic post held 8 dispatches from HOA panel affiliates. Some groveling regrets feigning they'd never backed Karen initially. Others vacant bids to elucidate misconceptions and reconstruct faith. But one distinguished. It originated from someone I hadn't anticipated. Ron, the subdued chap 2 allotments distant, the identical one who'd left that voice alert cautioning me pre-matters formalized. His dispatch was straightforward, one stanza. He stated he'd grasped Karen was testing edges, but hadn't fathomed how distant until the tribunal disclosures. He had enlisted the HOA to shield his estate, not to assail another's, and now he desired to confer. I consented, chiefly from intrigue. We convened at my estate's rim near the lake where the aged wharf drooped faintly over the waves. Ron arrived bearing 2 brew vessels, one proffered to me as a truce token. He appeared weary, elder than I recalled, like the strain of belonging to Karen's apparatus had exacted a levy. He omitted preambles. He stated she'd been weaving falsehoods for weeks, murmuring of me in assemblies, asserting I plotted to introduce leisure lodgings, vessel congestion, and outsiders who'd despoil the enclave. She'd rendered it sound like I was an encroaching firm, not a fellow who merely craved to angle serene. He conceded they'd never probed the titles, never verified the county logs, just credited her terms since she sounded assured and enveloped all in juridical resonant babble. He stated the HOA panel was crumbling now. Half reconsidered their stances. 2 had abdicated. 1 had conceded they balloted on proposals sans ever scanning the records. And Karen, she was mute. No dispatches, no periodicals, no abrupt cakes on verandas. She'd vanished since the session. I expressed thanks for his candor and stated I harbored no rancor, but I wouldn't erase either. Then I tendered him a replica of the path entry diagram and indicated the covenant that traversed my terrain. I conveyed I wasn't scheming to obstruct it presently, but if alterations failed, I held every lawful entitlement to barrier it enduringly. He inclined gradually and stated that would slay estate worths across the trail's east flank. I conveyed that was precisely the intent. That dusk, I refreshed the placards anew, not with menaces, but with lucidity. I embedded solar beacons around the estate edge, supplanted every placard with a novel one imprinted in enduring coat, and erected an alert on the path that declared, personal entry route. Employment liable to proprietor approval. Lenses operational. Intruders will be pursued under County Statute December 3, 18. It wasn't histrionic. It was exact. And that exactness dispatched waves through the enclave swifter than any repassed summons Karen had ever posted. By week's close, I had obtained 3 more dispatches. This instance from estate holders desiring discourse, intrigued by what the waiver signified, if they could withdraw too, if the HOA retained lawful base anymore. I omitted counsel. I merely recounted what I'd enacted and whence I sourced my data. Permit them excavate solo. But it wasn't wholly serene because when folks like Karen tumble, they don't withdraw elegantly. They seek a novel slant. And assuredly, I got a ring from my advocate 2 days on informing me that the HOA had lodged a rebuttal action, striding to solicit an enclave-spanning ballot to compel a revision that would redraw the HOA perimeter strokes to encompass me, asserting I had been erroneously omitted from the primal charter owing to scribal flaw. It was a risible ploy. A frantic ultimate supplication styled to appear sanctioned but upheld by no forerunner. But it signified they weren't concluded. I conferred with my juridical squad afresh. And this instance we weren't merely guarding. We drafted a formal halt directive, not solely against the HOA, but against Karen singularly, citing badgering, deceitful misportrayal, assayed defacement, and fabrication. We affixed the leaflet she had disseminated erroneously asserting my terrain was of the HOA and appended attestation from Ron who had consented to testify if required. Then I acceded. I lodged for an interim curb on the route covenant employment citing perilous meddling and enclave disturbance. I didn't apply it. I merely lodged it and that sufficed. Tidings disseminated rapidly. Within 48 hours, Karen's backers commenced vanishing. One by one, their designations were excised from HOA subpanel rosters. Assembly proclamations shortened. The periodical rhythm plummeted to naught. The silver pine cone emblem that had once graced every postbox was stripped by estate holders who realized they'd lashed to a floundering craft. But the true strike emanated from the county proper. Post-scrutinizing the records we tendered, the planning panel initiated a probe into the HOA's recent lodgings. They commenced posing queries on whether levies flowed, how verdicts formed, and why estate probes had transpired sans license. Karen was summoned for responses. I learned of it from the Registrar's Bureau when I went to deposit another title elucidation. The lady at the counter beamed and stated, "You truly roused the swarm, Mr. Weston." I stated I wasn't assaying to. I merely craved my barrier restored. But the verity was I didn't resent the rouse because the swarm had erected itself on deceptions, dread, and a spurious sense of dominance. And occasionally the sole manner to address something so swollen is to breach it and permit the daylight incinerate it down. By month's end, Karen was absent. Her abode sat dim. No HOA markers in the panes. No flux of visitors or notepad calls. Some asserted she'd embarked on a prolonged sojourn. Others intimated of kin crises, but I knew what transpired. She wasn't concealing. She was biting. Folks like her don't relinquish readily. They merely seek the subsequent chance to reauthor the narrative. So, I remained primed. I maintained the lenses active. I refreshed the drone permit. I appended a secondary tier of activity detectors along the route and verified the barrier classed nightly because while the strife appeared concluded, the quietude felt like an interlude, not a finale. But this instance, I wasn't pursuing. This instance I was 5 strides forward. And the subsequent instance someone essayed to impose their rendition of structure onto my terrain, they wouldn't merely confront opposition. They'd confront a fellow with every record, every forerunner, and every juridical shaft already targeted and primed. It was a chill, lucid dawn when I obtained the certified packet that would propel the forthcoming phase into play. I already knew its origin pre the postal aid even alighted the conveyance. The HOA header virtually radiated through the leaf like a mutagenic alert. I bore it indoors, settled at the galley surface, and slid it unhurriedly, not from reluctance, but from inquisitiveness. I desired to gauge how profoundly they were disposed to delve. Within lay a complete bundle of records scrupulously assembled, brimming with stately phrasing and histrionic course captions that shrieked frenzy beneath a patina of sanctioned. It was titled Application for HOA Perimeter Growth and Merger Examination. Per the leaves, the Silver Pines HOA had convened an urgent panel session and balloted affirmatively for soliciting county sanction to amend their domain perimeters to encompass my estate retrospectively. They termed it a vital step to sustain enclave norms and rectify ancestral lapses. The application dripped with locutions like estate holder synchronization, persistence of enclave principles, and oversight equivalence. They even affixed attestations, nameless ones, implying my attendance was a fount of visual discord and societal unrest. I nearly spewed brew across the surface upon scanning that line. Visual discord, as if my crafted barrier stakes and solar beacons affronted their neutral blinds and synthetic garden birds. But what prompted my halt wasn't the absurd diction or the complete juridical arrangement. It was the juncture. Karen hadn't endorsed the script. Her designation surfaced nowhere. Rather, it was submitted beneath the temporary endorsement of a chap I scarcely recognized, HOA bursar, someone I'd glimpsed once or twice at the repast debacle, but had never addressed. I pierced it promptly. Karen was employing a surrogate. She'd muted post the session, but that didn't signify she was absent.
She was realigning behind other visages, aspiring to sidestep the straight juridical recoil while still piloting the vessel. I reclined and fixed on the bundle, perceiving they still essayed a contest where they presumed I ignored the protocols. But this instance, I wasn't delaying for a tribunal to disassemble them. I was disassembling them openly. I placed 3 rings that midday. Initially to my advocate to ready a straight reply and claim for the application to be retracted founded on title shield. Second to my ally at the County Archive Bureau soliciting a verified rendering of the waiver provision for communal dissemination. And third to the Settlement Gazette, the identical one that had dispatched a scribe to the prior session. I bade the overseer to my estate, recounted there was a narrative grander than merely a neighborly spat, one on intrusion, spurious sway, and what transpires when an enclave's guidance resolves to reforge actuality sans lawful base. He arrived 2 days on with a writing pad and a keen intellect. The sort of chap who had matured chronicling genuine narratives and knew how to scent frenzy behind a bulwark of methodical phrasing. I guided him via all, displayed him the primal titles, the county lodgings, the images of the barrier ruin, the stream of Karen's repast proclamation, the leaflet she masqueraded as sanctioned zoning, and the application that now asserted my abode required absorption for the enclave's benefit. He omitted many queries. He required not. The proof resounded louder than aught either of us could utter. That Sabbath, the caption struck the Settlement Gazette like a frigid buffet. Local HOA essays terrain seizure despite lawful waiver. It was trailed by a complete account detailing the perimeter intrusion, the sham probes, the magistrate's comments, and citations from county functionaries affirming that the HOA lacked any lawful conduit to encompass my estate under their edict. My designation was imprinted. So was Karen's, and so was that of the novel surrogate who had lodged the application. The images depicted my hut, my placards, and the fractured barrier stake still housed in my outhouse as tangible corroboration. The settlement adored it. The HOA did not. The repercussion was swift. Within hours of the piece launching digitally, I commenced obtaining dispatches from estate holders, not solely from Silver Pines, but from adjacent enclaves. Some craved counsel, others imparted dread tales of akin HOA assaults. Some merely craved to express gratitude for confronting them. But the grandest influence emanated from interior. HOA affiliates who had formerly lingered mute now initiated vocalizing. One lady dispatched me namelessly with replicated records displaying that the HOA had expended thousands in juridical costs striving to contest my title. Funds drawn straight from communal levies sans ballot. Another panel affiliate abdicated publicly, citing moral qualms. The highlight was the communal digital strand, which I had shunned for months, but now perused from pure intrigue. It was a conflict arena of annotations, some devoted to Karen, others incensed on the deceptions, and an expanding group exacting an urgent reballot of the full panel. Karen, assuredly, stayed unseen amid all, but her muteness solely magnified the clamor. That week, a formal HOA assembly was proclaimed, accessible to all inhabitants, required for panel affiliates. I resolved to join, not to contend, but to observe. I desired to witness what transpired when a domicile erected on spurious dominance commenced to devour itself internally. The assembly transpired in the communal auditorium, a lengthy oblong chamber with collapsible seats and acrid brew. I arrived 5 minutes premature and claimed a perch in the rear, overlooked initially. The chamber brimmed. Elder pairs, youthful clans, the chap who ever clipped his sword in formal footwear. They were all present, uneasy, murmuring. When Karen at last entered, I knew precisely why she hadn't surfaced for a week. She appeared fatigued, slimmer, like the burden of upholding the mirage had at last overtaken her. She essayed a beam, but it failed to touch her gaze. She positioned at the fore, cleared her gullet, and commenced vocalizing in that identical uniform directive timbre she ever employed. But this instance, none inclined to hearken. She initiated justifying the merger bid, terming it a lapse of records in aim. She stated the HOA had solely craved to shield the enclave's essence and that certain juridical delineations had been misconstrued. That was when I rose. Not flourish, not bellowing, just serene paces to the fore. Bearing a manila dossier in one palm, I queried courteously if I might address the chamber. Karen essayed to refuse me the platform. The throng overruled her. I unclasped the dossier and elevated the verified waiver title, the accented provision, the imprinted county sanction. I displayed them the expense of the sham probes, the imprinted diagrams, the juridical costs they never balloted on. I recited aloud the magistrate's terms from the rendering. Then I reclasped the dossier and stated one item. If aught of you yet credit that this panel embodies your aims, then you merit all that's impending. But if you crave an enclave founded on faith, not dominance, then perhaps it's moment to query why you permitted another to clutch the tether so long. Then I exited. By the subsequent day, the panel had imploded for abdications, a summons for complete reballot. The county affirmed the application had been formally spurned, and the novel HOA site that supplanted the aged one held no illusion of Karen, no silver pine cone emblem, and no juridical delusions on merging aught. My path lingered accessible presently. My barrier endured sturdier than ever, and the placard by my entry bore a novel supplement, just 3 terms imprinted pristine and lucid on alloy. You were cautioned. The quietude that ensued was not the uncanny sort, but the merited sort, the sort that descends over a locale solely post all boisterous and trivial has depleted its air. The path beside my estate lingered vacant for a week. No repassed surfaces, no HOA runners with notepads, no subtly hostile beams from across the foliage. Just gust in aviance and the gradual restoration of isolation. I devoted my morns patrolling the estate line, not from vigilance anymore, but from routine, like a fellow inspecting his terrain, not for perils, but to recall why he contended initially. The placards endured elevated, the solar beacons endured pulsing softly through the dusk. The perimeter strokes now as esteemed as they had once been trodden. Periodically I'd glimpse someone halt at the path origin and gaze toward my entry, scanning the placard mutely pre-turning. Some were novel settlers, youthful pairs with offspring who had freshly relocated into the enclave and had heard the narrative secondhand, contorted and warped like any legend relayed from dweller to dweller. Others were acquainted visages, now divested of their prior arrogance, abased by the fraying of their sovereign's seat. Karen, as far as I knew, still resided 2 lanes distant, but she had vanished utterly from view. No more periodicals, no HOA declarations, no civic showings at all. The sanctioned rationale for her abdication, as inscribed in the latest enclave revision, was exhaustion and private wellness. But those who had beheld the tribunal scene knew superior. There are varied sorts of quietude, and hers was the sort that descends on someone who has been bared so utterly there's no recuperation left to contrive. One midday in early autumn, I obtained an unanticipated rap at the portal. I unlatched it to discover Ron positioned there anew, palms in his coat pouches, donning the mien of a fellow who had access to utter and no notion how to utter it. He queried if he might enter. I inclined and shifted aside. We perched on the veranda, no brew this instance, just 2 seats and a prolonged band of warp dissolving through the foliage. He omitted circumlocution. He recounted the novel HOA panel had formed, that ballots had transpired swiftly and mutely. Most of the aged sentinel had descended willingly, a few beneath duress. The novel leader was a youthful lady named Elise who had relocated a 12-month prior and had been one of the scant to ballot against Karen's merger ploy from the outset. Ron stated the panel was rephrasing its statutes, rendering levies elective, excising any provision that even hinted at compelled adherence. He stated my instance had prompted them to rethink all. Then he tarried and gazed across my terrain like he beheld it for the initial instance. He stated, we truly did credit what she recounted us. We deemed you were the peril. I omitted prompt reply. Not from bitterness, but since I'd heard sufficient regrets lately to discern which stemmed from the core and which were mere breeze. His was genuine. So, I merely stated, folks credit all manner of items when someone vocalizes like they possess the firmament. He inclined and rose to depart. But he did, he tendered me something. A petite timber panel hand-hewn, coarse at edges. It declared, gratitude for upholding the boundary. I knew not what to utter, so I omitted. I merely inclined once and he departed. In the weeks that trailed, existence reverted to its innate tempo. I angled anew. I mended a segment of the wharf that had commenced to droop. I even initiated erecting a modest stone blaze hollow down by the waves, something I'd intended since the primal day I relocated. I harbored no schemes to vend, no schemes to lease, no intents of erecting out ostentatious or contemporary. I merely craved the terrain the manner it was fated to be, undisturbed. And yet, even as serenity embedded, I never wholly lowered my vigilance.
The lenses endured active. The drones endured powered. The volume of records lingered in its sheath by the portal. Because folks like Karen don't truly dissipate. They withdraw, reassemble, bide for duration to mellow reminiscences and bewilderment to re-author chronicle.
She may have forfeited the rank, the dominance, the mirage, but folks like her ever credit the subsequent intrigue will function superior, more mutely, more lawfully adroit.
I was primed for that. I didn't dwell timorous. I dwelt readied.
And every instance I traversed the placard at the entry that declared, "You were cautioned," I beamed, knowing it was no longer a dispatch for her.
It was a cue to myself that serenity is never gratis.
It must be guarded not with knuckles, but with verities, endurance, and an unyielding grasp of where you stance literally and figuratively. Then one frigid dawn, I embedded something novel beside the blaze hollow facing the lake where the orb alighted just aptly. A petite iron effigy hand-wrought by a regional carver, tasked mutely. It was a straightforward form, an elder holding a parchment in one palm and chortling, not derisively, but with the leisure of someone who had viewed every deception disintegrate in languid motion. The parchment in his palm was imprinted with the term title, scarcely discernible unless you peered intimate. And beneath the effigy, incised into the stone plinth, was a line I would bear with me for my remaining days.
Let them author their norms. I'll persist authoring mine in stone.
I perched beside it as the orb ascended and the final haze wafted off the lake, viewing a realm that no longer required defense every tick, knowing the fray had terminated not with strife, but with the verity arrayed nude, straightforward, pristine, and serene as the terrain beneath my soles.